All right, I'm back with my notes and my water. I think we're ready. Hi, my name is Cecelia, and I haven't even counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hi, my name is Cecelia. Thank you so much for being here. I want to share with you everything I read in January and February of this year, 2025. I read a total of 13 books in the last 2 months and 10 manga volumes. So I'm going to talk about everything. I'm going to start with books and then finish with manga because I rate books and manga a little differently. These books are going to be organized by how much I enjoyed them. So we're going to start with the books that I enjoyed the least and then finish with the books that I enjoyed the most. And then manga, we're just going to talk about chronologically because I don't really rate manga. I have 3 categories that I've kind of bucketed these books into. The first category are books that I would not recommend. The second category will be books that I soft recommend. And then the last category is going to be books that I widely recommend for anybody. Conveniently, the books that I would not recommend are right on top of my pile. So we're going to talk about them first. Oh, and then I ordered them in categories. This was my least favorite of everything I read. And it's kind of cheating because it's a little short story. And this is Susanna Clarke's The Wood at Midwinter. I think it's not so much that I didn't like it. I think I was just ultimately disappointed. I'm going to talk about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell in this video as well, which is why I picked up this short story. It has like these really amazing illustrations in it, which I loved, and I thought that was so cute. But the ending was really abrupt, and a good chunk of this short story, like this actual physical copy, is just like notes. Like everything back here is Susanna Clarke's note to the reader on how she came about writing this story, which I thought was more interesting than the story itself. It's nice, but I was ultimately kind of disappointed. All right. Next in my would not recommend category, and actually the only other thing I have, is sadly Water Moon by Samantha Sotto Yambao. I listened to this on audiobook and I think that was the right way to read it. I think my expectations were too high for this. I really wanted to love this. I read a lot of reviews, and I know this is like a really buzzy book right now, and pretty much everybody that is disappointed by it is saying the same thing. So I don't want to like repeat the same ideas too much, but basically I think the setting was really strong in this. I had like a really clear imagery of what was happening. I think some of the language is really beautiful. Some of the lines in this book were really interesting and thought-provoking, but ultimately I just didn't really click with the characters. It's hard to talk about without spoiling the story, but I think that the romance in it was super forced, and I just like didn't care. Like I almost think it would have been better if it wasn't a romance, but then I don't necessarily know how the author would have gotten around the plot without them being like romantically interested in each other. So yeah, bummer, huge bummer. All right, so now my biggest category I have are the books that I would softly recommend to someone who's already interested in them, but like maybe would not widely recommend them. Again, these are ranked, so we're ranking them from like least enjoyable to most enjoyable. So first up is another disappointment. A huge trend I had towards the beginning of the year was I was reading a lot of authors I had already read from before, and nothing I read really lived up to something else I had read by that author. So I kept reading things and being like, oh, this isn't as good as their other thing. So first up is my strongest example of that, and that's actually a poetry collection, and it's And Yet by Kate Baer. I was really excited to read this because her other poetry collection, What Kind of Woman, is one of my favorite things of all time. And I like did enjoy quite a few things. Like I tabbed some of my favorite poems, but I think overall this collection was just a little bit repetitive. It really focused on motherhood and childcare specifically. And I'm not a parent, and so I found some of these hard to relate to. And I'm not saying like I have to relate to a poem to enjoy it, but I think the themes were becoming a little bit redundant. And so I think overall it just didn't hit as strongly for me as her other collection did. Nothing really like stood out to me that much. Like I'm looking at the poems that I underlined and I'm like, I don't even remember this. Whereas I remember very strongly other poems in her other collection, What Kind of Woman. So yeah, this was kind of a disappointment for me, but I would still be interested in picking up other collections by this author. All right. I have another collection, and this is a short story collection, and this is Black Enough. It's edited by Ibi Zoboi. It's a YA short story anthology. And I think this, oh, I left my bookmark in here. I think this is fine. Like, I think like most anthologies, there were some stories in here that I really loved, some stories in here that I thought were just okay. My biggest takeaway from this was I had only read from a few of these authors before. I came away with authors that I'm really eager to check out. I actually did pick up a YA book right after I finished this collection by one of these authors. Some of my favorites, Half a Moon by Renee Watson was about two half-sisters at a summer camp, and I am a sucker for a good summer camp story. I really loved Black Nerd Problems by Lamar Giles. That takes place at the mall, and I just loved the characterization of the characters like representing each store. I thought that was so fun. The Ingredients by Jason Reynolds. I don't know, I'm a little biased towards Jason Reynolds, so that was good. Oreo by Brandy Colbert I really liked. Samson and the Delilahs by Tochi Onibuchi. Wild Horses, Wild Hearts by J. Cole I liked. Woe by Rita Williams Garcia was one of the only stories in here that really played with genre, and I loved that. I think part of the reason why I kind of rated this a little low was all of them were very contemporary or romance heavy, and it just started getting repetitive after a while. And then Gravity by Tracy Baptiste, I thought had the most unique language in this collection. Both of those were a really nice reprieve from like a little bit more repetitive stories. Yeah, I would say if this is like on your shelf or something you're interested in, I would recommend it, but like most anthologies, there are some like really strong points and really weak points as well. So next on my list is a memoir, and this is The Other Wes Moore by Wes Moore. I listened to a big chunk of this on audio, so I read this like tandem, like physically and on audio, and the author narrates it himself, and I always love that. So this is a story about this man, Wes Moore, who like grew up in Baltimore, and you know, like throughout his life he moved to the Bronx. He ends up going to like military school in high school and enlists in the US military, and years later another man with the same name of Wes Moore is found guilty for shooting a police officer during an armed robbery. And so the chapters alternate. Like this Wes Moore, the author, is telling the story, so his chapters are in first person, and then the other Wes Moore's chapters are told in third person. The language that was shared in the like preface or the author's note at the beginning or whatever it was made it sound like maybe there was going to be a little bit more like analysis on why kids in similar neighborhoods like branch off and have very extremely different lives. There was a lot of focus on this, on like gangs and how gangs are kind of predatory towards young kids, and it's hard to really break out of that system. And I wish there had been just a touch more analysis on that, and that feels weird to say in a memoir because this is like very obviously this author's memoir, but at the same time he's telling the story of another man, and I wish there was a little bit more connection between the two other than just like two narratives. Anyway, that's my thought on this. I think it was a really interesting story. I'm glad I read it, and I would recommend this if this is something that interests you, but I wouldn't say it's like the strongest memoir I've ever read. I feel weird talking about the book I read next because I actually think this is like one of the more enjoyable books I read, but everything else was just like a touch better. We're switching gears again, and we have a YA contemporary, and that's Little and Lion by Brandy Colbert. I was pretty sick in February. I read this in February, and I had like the worst cold I ever had. I honestly thought it was COVID, but I tested negative for COVID. So it was just a terrible cold. And I, at a certain point, like I couldn't even read. I was reading other things and I was just like, I can't do this. So I specifically picked up a YA. I just need something easy. And I loved it. I thought it was so good. I think it was really cute. There's a story about a teen girl named Little. Her nickname is Little, and her half brother, whose nickname is Lion. And so it's really about Little and her relationship with Lion. I loved this. I thought this was so good. I listened to some of it on audio and I like tandem read it back and forth. I flew through it. It was so cute. I did read some reviews after because I had like a kind of a pretty mediocre rating on Goodreads. I read some reviews and there's quite a bit of people who called out some like biphobia in here with our main character. Reading some of those reviews, I could understand how people made that conclusion. So just putting that out there. And that's like another factor why I kind of decided to put this in like towards the middle of my list. Maybe it was because I was sick. Maybe it was because I just went in with a different mindset, but I didn't even realize that I was reading a love triangle until other reviewers called it out. I don't know, like I wasn't really rooting for either of them to end up with the people that they were interested in the book. Also, one thing I did really love about the book and wish that it had been like drawn out a little bit more was that Little, whose name is Suzette. Many characters throughout the story, like different moments, like different characters at different times said to Suzette pretty much like verbatim, like you're a good person. But Suzette was making choices that I would consider like bad decisions that like maybe a good person wouldn't make. And I thought that was really interesting that other people were seeing like this side of her and like putting her on this like pedestal that I feel like me as a reader and maybe other readers feel similarly that maybe Suzette didn't really deserve. And maybe, you know, Suzette was also feeling that way too. Like she didn't really deserve this title that people were giving her, or maybe she did deserve it and like wanted to live up to that a little bit more. To me, that was really the focus of this story. Okay, switching gears, like absolutely completely. One of the very first books I finished in 2025 was Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. I ultimately really enjoyed this. However, I will say that I don't think it's as strong as Ninth House, and I do think that there were very slow parts that were not as enjoyable as some of the other parts in this book. And I'm not going to say much because it would be a spoiler, but like I read the first 50% in like 0 time at all, and then the second 50% it took me like double the amount of time, which especially for Leigh Bardugo, who I feel like her beginnings are very slow and very murky, and it feels like you're just wading through whatever world she created until everything just like kind of clears up and it makes sense. Like this did not feel like some of her other books. Also, I can't tell if we're gearing up for some type of romantic subplot in here, and I think I'm in the minority when I say I don't really care about it. I don't care. I don't care. I don't really care. Some things I did really like about Hellbent, which is why it's like so high on my list. It feels weird to call this a fun book, but I do think it's kind of fun. And I also really love that this is feeling a little bit more like an ensemble cast. I like how Alex is opening up a little bit more in this book and is like trusting some people. I really love that we got more of Dawes in this book. I love Dawes so much. Dawes feels like Miranda to me from An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. Yeah, I know a lot of people were really disappointed with Hellbent. It definitely doesn't live up to Ninth House for me, but I still had a good time reading it, and I am eager to read the sequel. Okay, I feel like we're getting whiplash from genres here, because now I have a romance. And it's another repeat author for me that didn't live up to other books that they wrote, but at the same time was still good. This is pretty high on my list. We don't have that much more to go. We're more than halfway. And it's Funny Story by Emily Henry. I think Emily Henry is always gonna write a strong book. I think Funny Story is strong, it's good. I just don't think it's as good as some of my other favorites. I don't know if this stands out to me, to be honest. And maybe that's like a personal preference, but I wanted a little bit more mess. Like I really just wanted a little bit more like rage and justice and like some type of like really messy interaction, and I didn't get that. And I was like, I like walked away feeling like unsatisfied, like I wanted some type of throwdown, and maybe I shouldn't have expected that from Emily Henry. Also, people on the internet said that Miles, the love interest in this book, was like Nick Miller, and I completely disagree. I think maybe that's also why I kind of went in for mess. Like, Nick Miller is a mess. I don't think Miles is messy. He's just going through a breakup. Like, he seems sad. He doesn't seem like he keeps his bills in a box in his closet. I don't know. Overall, I mean, I'm happy I read it. This was another book I did a tandem read with the audiobook, and Julia Whalen just like knocks it out of the park every time. And so like I was constantly reading this. Like, if I wasn't reading it physically, I was listening to it. And when I wasn't reading it, I was thinking about it. Like, it was very, very captivating. I thought about it even after I finished it. I just don't think it's as strong as some of her other books. That doesn't mean it's a bad book, because I feel like this is still really, really strong, romance especially, but that's all I have to say. Okay, we have one more book in the like would softly recommend category, and I really struggled because I kind of wanted to put this one in the next category and like a strongly, widely recommend, but at the same time, I don't feel like I can widely recommend this book if you're not already interested in it, and that's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. And the reason I don't think I can widely recommend this is because it's like 800 pages and it takes a commitment to read it. Anyway, I spent about a month reading this. I started this in mid-December and I finished it in like mid-January. I picked this specifically because I was about to reach a large milestone, which is reading, or maybe I shouldn't say reading, tracking 1,000 read books on Goodreads. And I was like, I need something monumental for my 1,000th book tracked on Goodreads, and I picked Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Let me talk about some things I liked about this. It's fantasy. It's about magicians. It's about magic. It reads like historical fiction. You could tell me there was actually magic in England in the 1800s, and I would believe you. Like, this reads like it's real, which I don't know how to explain. I hope I did that justice. It was very, very immersive, very immersive. My second favorite thing about this was the humor. It was like my humor. I completely jived with this. I thought it was dry, it was witty. The narration was funny. Like, it wasn't just the characters had funny dialogue, it was the way the story was narrated. The narrator was funny. My third favorite thing about this was I thought that she was very economical with her characters. We're going to talk about someone else who's very economical with her characters, and she's not that quite this other level that I'm going to talk about, but I do feel like in the beginning we are introduced to like character, and then next chapter a new character, and then the third chapter another character, and it feels like we're kind of just getting some like character backstory for our main protagonist, but also a little bit of world building. And then we come in like midway through the story and these characters pop up again, and it just grounds the story a little bit better, and I really loved how she did that. My biggest complaint, and why I think this is not like a perfect 5-star for me, was I wish that the two main characters had been a little bit easier to root for. I'm not asking them to be likable characters, but they were both very selfish, very self-involved, kind of stupid at times, and I was like, it's like I don't really want you to succeed. Like, I want you to fail. And by the time we got to like their rivalry, I was like, good, you guys should like fight each other off because you're both terrible. And they weren't like evil. Like, it wasn't like they were making evil choices, but at the same time, well, you could maybe have that argument. They were making very selfish decisions that had very real impacts on other people. And I found that my favorite characters, the ones that I did really want to succeed, were side characters, and they were Arabella, Stephen Black, and Lady Pole. Like, I was very, very invested in that storyline, and I think that was intentional. I can totally see myself rereading that in about like 10 years. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, it's a good book, but it's not anywhere near as good as Pure Nessie. Okay, moving on again. We're moving on into my widely recommend category, and I have 4 books in here. I can't wait to talk about them. So the first book I have in this category is the only other book that I read completely on audio, and that's Honey and Spice by Bolu Babalola. I absolutely loved this. I thought this was such a good romance, and I am so excited. I was like, I need to read everything this author has ever written, and this was her debut, but I got a little spoiled for myself. I realized that the book she has coming out in September is like not necessarily a sequel, but like a companion or maybe a sequel to Honey and Spice, and I got a little spoiled. I loved this story. I really liked that it was set at a college, but it felt very adult. But at the same time, I think this only could have worked in like a university setting. I don't think you could take these characters and like age them up to adulthood and still have the same story, because they were so messy, just like, you know, a young adult or a teenager. I really loved that. I really liked Kiki. I loved Kiki learning how to trust and build female friendships. I think that was a really great subplot. The book relied a lot on the banter between our protagonist and our love interest, on really creating chemistry and really creating a spark, which I like love when there's really good banter between characters. But I think sometimes it felt like they were either very physically drawn to each other with their appearance, or had this like really jokey, like teasing back and forth that like borderline mean, which is like right up my alley. And I loved it, but sometimes it was just too long. Next book we have is a middle grade, and I don't read a lot of middle grade books, but every time I do, I'm like, oh, I should read more middle grade. But this is The Night Diary by Veera Hiranandani. This is a historical fiction middle grade story that takes place during, I think it's the 1940s. Yes, 1947, when India becomes free from British imperialism, but India now separates to create India and modern day Pakistan. And so like this was like a moment in time which I knew basically just that much about. Yeah, this was my first 5-star read of the year, and I loved it. I cried multiple times. I wish this had been an adult novel, because there were characters. I am just dying to know the backstory of some of these adult characters. Oh, I just really loved this. I thought this was so good. It's also an epistolary novel. The main character is writing in her diary. I love a good epistolary novel. I thought this was really, really well done. I thought it was really well written. I love that she made us feel sympathetic for every character in this story. I loved that. This was one of 2 books that I cried at. So really good. Widely recommend that. Very, very well done. The next book I also widely recommend is the other collection of short stories I read, and that's Out There by Kate Folk. I know a lot of people have read and loved this. I absolutely did. I loved it so much that I went and pre-ordered Sky Daddy, which is Kate Folk's debut novel, which I knew was coming out this year, but I didn't really care about it. And then I finished reading Out There and was like, I need to read everything that Kate Folk has ever written, and so I pre-ordered it. There were definitely some stories in here that I didn't like and I would give like individually a low rating to, but there are some stories in here that I'm still thinking about. One of my favorite things that Kate Folk did in this collection was she takes a really weird topic and places that this like absurd concept and roots it in mundane everyday life. It's just so, it's so interesting. This not only was interesting to read, it made me want to write. I was so inspired by some of the things that she did in here. I thought it was so creative. And another thing, I think she just had fun writing this. I want to read more things that you can just tell people had fun writing. The last book I'm going to talk about before we talk about manga is probably my favorite thing I read, which has nothing to do with my bias at all. I'm just kidding, it has everything to do with my bias. But I am widely recommending it, even if you don't really care about the topic. It's a nonfiction, and that's Troop 6000 by Nikita Stewart. This is a nonfiction story about Troop 6000, which is a Girl Scout troop that was started in a homeless shelter, I think in Queens. Yeah, in Queens. I have known about this since it started. Like, I remember watching like news clips about this Girl Scout troop. I used to work at Girl Scouts in a different council than the one in New York City. I used to be in Girl Scouts. I used to work at Girl Scout camp, and then I worked full time at Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts is like really ingrained in my life, and I knew about this story of a group of women starting a Girl Scout troop in a homeless shelter. And now it has spread to multiple shelters in New York City. They talk about it in the book, but it's also run by Girl Scout staff now. I loved this. I cried multiple times, more than once. I love Girl Scouts. I think Girl Scouts is an amazing organization. One of my favorite things about this book was how they talk about how life-changing Girl Scouts could be for adults, like for the leaders who were part of this program. The woman who started the troop with like her children in the shelter, she was a full-time Girl Scout employee. She still found herself part of New York City's like homeless system, the shelter system. Like it was very well written in a way that also highlighted some of the challenges that came with starting this troop. I really liked how the adults that were being interviewed in this book were honest about those experiences, and they ended up being in the book. I also like how we talked about when the troop was getting national attention and was going on like talk shows and morning news shows and was having like articles written about them. People were donating things or like donating their time, and it wasn't necessarily what the troop needed. So it was like the concept of well-intentioned people donating what they think is going to be useful, but it's not actually meeting any type of community need. And so I really like how they talked about that too. I thought this was a really well-balanced book. I thought this was really interesting. I thought this was really niche. It was so good. Okay. That was all the books I read. Now let's talk about the manga I read. I read some really, really, really great manga. I'm going to talk about them in chronological order. Okay, so the first manga I read was the third volume of Akko and Bambi. This is a story about a manga creator who goes by the pen name Bambi, who finds one day this ghost, Akko, in his apartment, and she doesn't really know why she's there. The ghost doesn't really know why she's there, and Bambi is like writing a ghost story manga. This third volume was my favorite in the series so far. The first two I really had to like struggle through. I felt like I was having a hard time kind of grounding myself in the story. I think some of that is intentional. Like it's a ghost story, so there's a little bit of like mystery there, but I think some of it was just me not really grasping the story. And so now 3 volumes in, I really feel like I have a solid understanding of what's going on. I'm really liking this. I'm going to continue reading it. I think this would probably be better read in like a binge read, but I've been reading them as they come out, and now the 4th one's out, so now I'm behind. But yeah, I think overall like this is a solid series. If you're interested in it, I don't know. Okay, the next 2 ones I read are potentially the best things I've read yet this year, and it might be the best thing I read all year. I read the first two volumes of The Guy She Was Interested In Wasn't a Guy at All. I mean, oh my god, it's so good. I don't think I've read a first volume of manga that good in years. One of my favorite things, I love the artwork. I also like it's green. I love it. It's so good. This is a story about this teenage girl, Aya, who really loves like Western 90s rock music, and she feels a little bit isolated that she really likes this music. None of her friends like this music, so she goes to a music shop and she sees this employee who's dressed like this with like a mask and a hoodie, and she is like, oh my god, like this guy understands me, and she starts to like have this like crush on him. Meanwhile, the employee there is actually Mitsuki, who sits next to Aya in class at school, and Mitsuki is embarrassed that Aya doesn't recognize her. I would say this, The Guy She Was Interested In Wasn't a Guy at All, is a cross between like Nana and Horimiya. That's how I would pitch this. I'm like, I don't need to gush about it anymore. It's so good. I might reread it. The next things I've read, I've been working on a reread of Fullmetal Alchemist. I haven't read Fullmetal Alchemist in like 10 years. I've probably watched the anime maybe like twice in the last 10 years, but I haven't reread the manga in a while. And so it feels like some of it feels just like kind of fresh. But I read volumes 12 through 16 of the new collector's editions. We're at the end of the story. I don't have much to say. Fullmetal Alchemist is amazing. It's one of my favorite stories across all mediums. Volume 15 out of this stack is probably my favorite because it feels like when you're at a sports game and the announcers introduce the teams and everybody is just like in the crowds going wild. One of my favorite things about Fullmetal Alchemist, and then we're gonna move on because I could talk about Fullmetal Alchemist for hours. One of my favorite things about Fullmetal Alchemist is how every single character is intentional, is purposeful. Like I said, Susanna Clarke's characters are economical. She knows how to use every last character down to the nitty gritty. He's just so smart. Anyway, that's Fullmetal Alchemist. The last manga I picked up were the first 2 volumes in this like new collection of Tokyo Babylon by Clarke. This was the very first thing I've ever read of Clarke. I used to watch Holic as an anime years ago, and that was like my first introduction to Clarke, but I have never read anything, so I'm trying to get into Clarke a little bit more, and I started with Tokyo Babylon, which I think is a good place to start. However, there's like an age gap romance in here. I hope it's not a real romance, and I hope it's just being like pitched as a romance, and then later it's gonna be like a haha gotcha type of moment. That's kind of what I'm hoping, but it's kind of weirding me out. I don't know, something seems like fishy to me, especially in the second volume. There's a couple things that pop up that are like, is this actually happening? We'll see. I'm gonna keep reading it. All right, so this was everything I've read, minus 2 that I read on audio. Everything I read in the start of 2025. I had a really good start to the year, I think. My biggest takeaway was that almost everything in this stack was backlist for me. It's a lot. I think I'm off to a really good start, really strong start. I always have a really good beginning of the year reading experience. Thank you so much for watching. If you read any of the books that I talked about, please let me know. I'd love to talk to you about some of them. Some of them I'm like desperate to talk about. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon.